Hey guys, my name is Lorran Garrison. Thank you so much for coming to Why Diverse Story Matters. Voices from the BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and neurodiverse communities. We have a great panel of professionals for you today, and I'm a little nervous because I'm excited to share. So my name is Lorran Garrison. I'm a school psychologist. The other moderator is down there, Ariel. Say hi. Hi. And so how this is going to happen is that since we have a huge panel today with diverse stories, every panelist will give a little bit about themselves and then tell why stories are important. And those writers out there, the comic book artists out there, please, we will have questions and answers, lots of giveaways, so think about that as we go through. That's a QR code, hopefully that works. When we start, I want to give a little bit of land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the Tonga and Ariel, help me out here. How do you say it? Thank you very much. Land, and so we appreciate and learn about their traditional and ancestral territories. So we have many benefits from their land. We thank the indigenous people here. So being the stewards of Mother Earth, and feel free to take a picture of this slide to honor the native land and the map that where you can find the land that you belong on. Also, we want to thank WonderCon for having diverse story panels because just a couple of years ago there were very few diverse panels available, and so thank again WonderCon, Comic-Con for having us. Once again, as I said, my name is Lorran Garrison. I am a school psychologist. I work in the public school system. I also work in the non-public school system. So what that means is that I assess students that qualify or not qualify for special education. So some of the questions I ask during the assessment of I do this special education are, do these students have typical IQ, cognition? Do they behave within the norm? What is expected of children of their age? Are they developmentally appropriate? Now this is very important because what does neurodiversity mean? Neurodivergent means, so neurotypical basically means the someone who has brain functions, behaviors, and processing standard, or what's considered typical of the average. Neurodiversity, what we're talking about today, was coined by a sociologist named Judy Singer, who's autistic, in 1997. So neurodiversity can be broken down into two categories of people usually, and those who are neurotypical, the standard, and those who are neurodivergent. What does neurodivergent mean? Neurodivergent is under the umbrella, also coined by the sociologist Judy Singer. So she originally used that term to specifically talk about autistic people, but now it has a whole range of people, including those who have ADHD, bipolar, depression, anxiety, etc. So, I spoke over at Comic-Con recently, and someone really wanted me to make this distinction, and I don't particularly, as a person of color, like the term neurodivergent, because divergent to me, the root is divergent, it seems exclusive. I prefer, I'm making up this term right here at WonderCon, neurovariant. So neurovariant to me, like Loki, get the Loki. Neurovariant is more inclusive and it talks about the variety. So, that's me. And so I recognize myself as someone who is neurovariant. Some people like the word neurodivergent as being rebellious, but, I'm just slightly, different than anyone else. But anyways, that's me. Ariel, would you like to give a little introduction of yourself down there?
Hi! Hi everybody, my name is Ariel Landrum. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. And the theory that I use in therapy is narrative therapy, so stories. I talk about with my clients how they're the author of their story, and I talk about the authors that they've experienced who've interpreted their story for them and how we creating new narrative or the narrative that aligns with them. We do a lot of re-authoring. Sometimes we started our narrative in a way that was maybe against ourselves or against our community, and now we want to be a new author. We want to rewrite our narrative, look at our experience in a different way. A lot of the clients that I work with are neurodivergent, AAPI. I specialize in working with military members and their families, and I specialize in working with the LGBTQIA2S+ community. And a lot of the work that we do talks about how their narrative has changed or transformed. When I went into the military, I thought my experience was going to be a certain way. I thought I was going to be a hero. And now I'm stepping out, I don't feel heroic anymore. Or how I started my narrative not knowing who my identity was. And now I have an identity, and I want to embrace that, live that. So as a clinician, one of the things that I always want to highlight with my clients in narrative therapy is that they are not wrong or bad, and that they know themselves better than I do. There's no way that I would be able to be the true author of their story. How can I align, witness, and be an audience member to your narrative? How can we make it real for you in a way that feels affirming?
Awesome. I appreciate that so much. So all of those who are seeking therapy realize therapy is a relationship. You don't have, if this therapy doesn't work for you, you can go and find somebody else. And that's exactly what Ariel was saying. So thank you for being my co-host. And so if you need our information, this is how you can contact us. And Natasha, please introduce yourself. Tell me why diverse story matters to you, and who are you?
Hello everyone, my name is Natasha Lee. I am an artist and I'm also a development support analyst at Insomnia Games. And so I've been in gaming for a little over 6 years. I've worked at Respawn, Infinity Ward, and Insomnia Games. And I have also been a gamer and comic book reader. I often say I came out of the womb with a controller. And so I think that, when it comes to having diverse stories, narratives that tell, of various groups of people, it's almost essential for those stories to be shared, for them to also be created by those people. Because as a child, I grew up in games, but I never got to see a character that looked like me, that maybe had a background like me. And I think that as I grew up and I decided what I wanted to be as an adult, I always thought the typical thing with my parents pushing me to be a doctor or get into bioengineering or something far from what I actually like to do, which is art and drawing. And because that there wasn't much representation of Black women in games, my parents were just like, that's crazy. I don't think that you can find work in that. You're going to be a starving artist. And I think that when you look at people who grow up around in California, I'm a military brat, so I've grown up in various locations, but people that grow up in California, maybe like more so around the Hollywood area, they're more likely to want to get into film or wanting to get into theater because it's something that they're close to and something that they see. And when you also see more characters that represent you in the media, it also makes it something believable for you to do. And so when you have people of color who are trying to find themselves in media to see if maybe they can be the hero of their own story or they can be a hero, it's not often there. And when it comes to stories for people of color, specifically Black people, a lot of it is trauma-based. And so you either think that that's the life I have to be, or that my story is only based in trauma, and that can give people like negative connotation of themselves. It creates a lot of self-hate, self-doubt, and when you have people in the room, when these stories are being created that come from these backgrounds, they can often shed light on how to maybe redirect the story or give a better perspective or not use a stereotype when these stories are being created. And I believe that is why I want to always be in any space where I can to show myself in these spaces that people of color aren't normally seen. And initially, when you look at a college, pamphlet or something in games, you don't typically see people of color all the time. And so when you do see them, people say like, oh, that's a token person that they got to just be in that picture. And I think that it's almost credible for that, because when I see it, it makes me still say, well, there is one. Maybe I can find someone that I can talk to and I can grow with and we can create things. And when I often, am I going too far?
Well, I was going to ask you, can you tell us a little bit about the art that you did in Sony's game, Miles Morales.
Oh, yes.
And how, you know, this is like, what do they call it, an Easter egg?
It's a mural, and yeah, there's a bit of an Easter egg too that you can find in the game. You do kind of directed to this. I'm sorry to go off on a tangent. But yeah, so, I mean, the pandemic has been harrowing for all of us, and then within that, we've had a lot of strife, especially when it's come to police violence and, you know, the systemic racism and things like that have happened in our country. I found it, you know, it's something too that we reflect on when we're in the process of creating stories. Like, have we told enough? Have we said enough? You know, is someone being represented? And so, as far as me being a Black person, seeing that, you know, seeing what was happening on TV, being connected with it all the time, I feel that 2020 was such a moment for it to open more people's eyes. And even though it was a horrible thing, it got more people hearing what had always been said, is that there has been police violence that has existed against minority communities. And so, of course, I think that in my studio is very open, we talk a lot, and so it was kind of brought to us to be able to do more. And when I came to Insomniac, I was like, this is my favorite studio, this is something I grew up on. Being in Miles Morales, I felt like this was my chance to kind of have a mark, something that I could call back to, like, I did that. And being an artist, I was able to create murals for the game, and I wanted something to just not be like a splash on the wall or, you know, a heart somewhere, but to also reflect, you know, as New York City is a real city, you know, a lot of our art reflects life, and this is something that's going on in our time, and I think it will always matter. Black lives will always matter, you know, and I think that to have that, I wanted something that represented various groups of Black people, and just make sure that it's actually stated. It's not something that we're hiding, because it does matter.
Thank you so much, and that was great. Mr. Calloway, please introduce yourself and tell me, why do diverse story matters? And tell me about your unique perspective and background.
For sure. Hi, everybody. Chance Calloway. This is my very first con ever, so I'm super excited to be here. Especially because I'm here to talk about my gay show, Pretty Dudes, as opposed to, you know, I've done superhero stuff in the past, but this is what got me here, so I'm excited. Yeah, so I grew up son of a preacher in a small town in Georgia called Brunswick, and then went to the military myself, discovered my queerness while I was enlisted, and then moved to Alaska, of all places, just because I was trying to get away from the South. And when I came to LA, and I was writing stories, because I'm a writer, I write anything, I write songs, I write music, I write poetry, and I just started to write stories, and my number one rule of storytelling is that specificity is universal. As, you know, a Black, queer, disabled person, I will watch something, and the main character is not a person who is like me in any way, and that's just the reality. You know, we've just learned to look at Tom Cruise, Robert Redford, all these guys, and we're just like, okay, cool. And I follow that story, I like the story, it's a great movie, whatever, you know, I put it in my back pocket, I read this book, wonderful, the person in the book is nothing like me, but I connect with it. So I realized, oh, I can tell stories about myself and people like me, and people who aren't like me should still be able to engage with it and respond to it. So after I had some personal tragedies in my life, I just wanted to laugh. So I said, I'm just going to make a sitcom. And I started working on this project called Pretty Dudes. And it's just based on my life, being a gay guy who was surrounded by straight people, or at least closeted people for the majority of my life. And I just decided just to tell that story. Like, what about this gay guy with all these straight friends and what his life was like? And the response that I got from it, from people of all backgrounds, from all cultures, all races, all genders, all, you know, just all kinds of people, they connected with the story in ways that just I was surprised by. Like, oh, I thought this was a purely a chance kind of situation. People were able to relate to it. Because again, I just told my truth, I made it funny, and people were just like, yeah, I see myself reflected in that. And that has just really encouraged me as I continue my storytelling journey. Because I feel like so often we think that we have to find a perfect mirror in order to understand who we are. And so often wow, I'm getting emotional. So often we can find ourselves, we find ourselves in the most unexpected places. And it moves me that people have been able to find themselves through my show. Even some of the actors who were involved in the show have given me personal stories about friends, family members who would come out to them because they said, I saw that show you were in, so it made me understand that you were an ally and you were a safe space for me. And that's something I didn't have growing up. That's something I didn't have until I was in my late 20s. So I'm very happy for all kinds of diverse stories to be told, because I want people to see themselves reflected back, or even just to open up a new door to understand who people are and how you can expand your own horizons.
And really quickly, what is it like being able to have this TV show on Amazon Prime and being Black and gay? Did you get pushback? What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I made it just for myself, really, so the fact that we're on Prime now and so many people can see it always amazes me. Definitely got a lot of pushback, which is one of the reasons I had to self-fund it. And when you watch the early episodes, it's very clearly self-funded. But I got pushback from all kinds of avenues of people who were in the industry. A lot of white producers thought that my show needed more white central characters. Black producers were confused because I was a Black creator and it wasn't a Black show. And then I got a lot of, there's a lot of Asians in the show. Isn't it an Asian show? Like, we casted the people who were right for the roles. So, there was a lot of pushback, but I think what happened when people started to watch it, they realized that these characters were authentic. Because whenever we cast people, for example, there's a character I'd written to be Creole, because that's my background, and we cast an Afro-Latino, and he came to me with some script notes, and we changed it to make sure that it was authentic. And I think if more creators were responsive in that kind of way, then we'd have more authentic storytelling.
Awesome, thank you so much. On that note, Robert, let's talk about your TV show on Amazon Prime. We're loving it.
That's what I look like. I'm in a mask. I want to watch your show now. I'm really excited about that. So this is more gay shit. So I'm Rice. I'm an actor, singer, and producer. I'm a singing front. I sing with the Barbershop Quartet. You may have seen us in random things on TV. We do a lot of weird stuff. But one of the reasons I'm here is that my husband and I have a production company called Freaky Putty Putty Films, and we are dedicated to fostering inclusive genre productions, and our flagship show is called Demon Hunters, spelled like Tinder or Grindr. It's basically just like a super queer, inclusive like genre show because we love Buffy and we wanted it to be gayer. Much to what,
right?
yeah, right. Or as my very straight half brother said, it's like Buffy needs skin events. So it's a little racy. But much to like what Chase was saying, we kind of just made the thing that we really wanted to see and were passionate about, and that sort of specificity attracted an audience. When we were also crowdfunding, which you might notice in the production, but when we were crowdfunding, we got a lot of support, not just from the queer community, but just from so many different horror communities, because it falls into the horror comedy sort of space.
That's Robert. All right, and we have Miss Madison Avery. Or Miss Avery. Is Madison your middle name? I don't remember.
It's a name.
Please
So,
introduce yourself. Yes.
Those of you who have your LGBTQ, AIU, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Rho bingo cards, with my presentation, you may now check off the trans, the bi, and the poly. Probably a couple of them be named later, but I just don't have that kind of time. I am a cartoonist and publisher and editor and bi and trans activist, and I've worked with, I have my own publishing imprint, Stack Deck Press, and I have worked with a nonprofit you may have heard of, Prism Comics, for about 10 years now. I grew up in a fairly conservative household. My father was a Southern conservative football hero, military man, self-made wealthy dude, and had no time for any foolish, not straight, not business-focused silliness from any of his children. And of course, I was heavily into comic books and I liked drawing his clothes on. So that really didn't set well with him. Of course, and I was very young when I realized that how heartbreaking it was. I could not be Supergirl. Because Supergirl was blonde and I was brunette, so I would probably have to be Mary Marvel. So representation matters because it's something we live in a much better world than we did 40 years ago in terms of stories for people who are LGBTQ, etc. In the dark times, when there was no good representation and the only representation was bad representation, we sort of were attracted to it. We kind of had to make do, or the sort of what they call the characters in subtext, the characters that seem queer in some way or other, but they can't come out and say that this is a queer character because then they would be taken off the air, or a comic book would be canceled or something. I can think of times reading the Legion of Superheroes, wondering if Chameleon Boy was going to change into a girl this issue, because that's really cool, and they do that. Wondering, whether or not, well, actually, I have crushes on both Remington Steele and Laura Holt. That didn't but into my teen years, when Howard Chaykin, a cartoonist I adore, he had trans and gender non-conforming characters, but they were always sinister and dangerous and downright evil, and I thought, yeah, I can. As I got older and I started to transition, I transitioned late in my 30s. In my youth, I was fairly trim fit, 142 weight class in my fighting, in college and whatnot. But not so much when I started to transition. It dawned on me that I couldn't be Audrey Hepburn. So once again, I went back to the comics looking for inspiration. And remembered there was a character who appealed to me when I was a younger person. Was Big Barda, the wife of Mr. Miracle. Big Barda was a Jack Kirby creation, as was Mr. Miracle, if you're familiar with the New Gods, the Fourth World Saga. The thing that distinguished Big Barda in the world of the early 70s was that there was something of a role reversal. Big Barda was the big, tough, strong one who shot first and asked questions later, threw heavy industrial equipment at people that annoyed her, and was very, very protective of her relatively delicate husband, Mr. Miracle. So I thought, no Audrey Hepburn, but Big Barda, I can do Big Barda. So that stood me well in later life and other dealings. So I was fortunate to discover a lot of other queer cartoonists. I was able to find a place for my comics and my art.
Thank you so much. Do you have a booth downstairs?
I'm exhibiting with Prism. We have, unfortunately, The Outside sold out. That is a book. I am a cartoonist. I can often contribute to other people's publications. I cannot claim credit of publishing The Outside, but I got my contributor copies and I sold through them all last month. It's a big hit if we can hopefully go to another printing. And then that is my We're Still Here. It's a Nick Nance award-winning anthology. It's the world's first all-transgender comics anthology. And we've got plenty of that down there. And Advanced Death Saves, I'm not the only Advanced Death Saves star here. Josh Trujillo, editor and publisher, is also here and will be signing a booth later this weekend. He's the responsible for the gay Captain America, Aaron Fisher, that you all have heard so much about, and a good friend of mine.
Thank you so much. And Mark, hi. Tell us about yourself. What's going on? Why is it important? Tell me where you're from.
Okay, let me begin with that. First of all, I want to say how much I love this panel because I think I wasn't really processing that in terms of I got the invitations and now we're here and we're all hearing these fantastic storytellers. Well, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Nazal. By trade, I guess I work in the film and television industry in the visual effects field in many different roles. We work on Swamp Thing, Person of Interest, Gotham, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Westworld. I think it becomes too many to mention at a certain point. And I think what's kind of interesting about that is like, yes, people say, oh my God, you work on all of these amazing projects. And I say to a lot of them, yes, they're great projects, but the thing is, I never truly saw myself in any of those. So let me begin there. But to answer your question too, yeah, in terms of my background, I grew up, I was born in the Philippines. I stayed there until I was about 6. And then I moved to the Middle East, stayed there until I was about in 10th grade, moved to Australia, then I moved here. So as you can tell, my background is fairly multicultural, and those are characters I never truly see because of exactly some of the things that were mentioned here, where people expect you to fit in one particular mold and expect you to just be there. And going back into why our stories matter is because we are not cookie cutter. Like, the world is not a cookie cutter. There's no Asian story, no black story, no any story. But what is important is that we put visibility to ourselves. So, apart from working on all of these amazing projects, in 2020, we started with a comic companion guide, or a comic companion to a short film that we were developing. Long story short, we fell in love with the artists and the community that was surrounding it. They're in the Philippines, Calloway, because there's so many fantastic artists there, which is no secret to the Marvel and the DCs of the world. But anyway, going back to the story, instead of just doing a companion comic, eventually we founded, I would say, in theory, the first Filipino-American comics company. Why is that important? The reason I say that's important to claim that is because even for myself, my journey has been, I never wanted to claim that because I never thought it was quote-unquote cool, right? It wasn't cool, it wasn't, what you saw would sell. And when we were developing the comic, we were like, okay, who do we pitch this to? For one, the comic is bilingual, because if you can have the Na'vi and the Jedi as languages on paper, you can certainly have a real language.